Our next session will explore various layers of automation. Which areas of operation BFSI companies want to automate and which parts should remain hybrid. How to measure the success of automation. More importantly, how automation will help BFSI companies to achieve the next level. I would like to request Amol Dethe, editor ETBFSI, to stay here and moderate this chat session on BFSI building automation to excel.
Thank you for staying back, dear participants, and I have another Power Pack session for you. Here we're going to talk about the automation. And let me tell you, since the name of the session is Building Automation to Excel, we have invited the CIO of Yes Bank, Mr. Mahesh Ramamoorthy. Mahesh, glad to have you for this session.
Hey, thank you, Amol. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on this session.
Good to see you as well, Mahesh. So to begin with, my first question to you, since every bank has done different kind of collaboration with the fintech rally is also emerging and they're coming with different innovations. Basic thing I would like to learn from you is what kind of focus areas that the bank, specifically Yes Bank, has with automation.
So, Amol, as an organization, strategically, our intent has always been, and as a strategic intent, is to move towards zero ops,
Right.
which would effectively mean that there is very minimal or hardly any, other than an exception, manual intervention. That's a goal. But towards that, obviously, we are now starting the journey by identifying those critical processes. That's very important for us to create not just customer experience, not just efficiency, but also make sure that there is the sufficient amount of risk control being established along the processes. Now, it's important if you look at the whole landscape that any bank would have across the whole journey. If you see in the front end, there is a lot that we are today deploying using a combination of RPA and bots to be able to create automation in terms of self-service by the customer. Whether it is in front, whether it is in the apps or whether it is the online space.
Right.
We're really creating some very innovative and intuitive stuff, capabilities, which essentially will be very well recognized. We have a few, we are keeping on the enhancement journey. When you come into the middle office, which is essentially the entire back office journeys, we've started upon a very ambitious program of making sure which is the biggest and the most heaviest used kind of processes and where there's a huge amount of manual intervention and that which gives us the maximum benefit. So we are trying identified about the top 15 processes first, and we're creating cycles of it. We're creating sprints, we're creating those use cases, and we're starting to use the automation capabilities, whether it is in terms of RPA, whether it is in terms of straight-through processings, and whether we have API handoffs to create those orchestrations. So that's essentially a big benefit, because by building the automation capabilities in the middle office, you're going to be able to eliminate a lot of the, I would say, handoffs that are happening, and will also create faster experiences, provide the front-end experience much better. So that's another area that we're looking at. So, and the third big area is in terms of the risk management. So as we get into a lot of automation, it is very important that with the kind of emerging digital payments, there is a huge amount of automation that we're trying to bring in, a layer with the AI framework, AI and ML framework, to be able to plug into the whole automation space, to help us get our risk triggers much better. So which means that how do I really start being in line with the transaction processing, or in terms of the account management process, the service processing, such that our risk is minimized, while at the same time we have a fair bit of intuitive tracking that's happening along the way of the transaction. So I think these three areas are in terms of our customer journeys that we are trying to either create experiences, enhance our entire efficiency, and then obviously create the risk management enhance the risk posture that we have from a bank perspective. Outside of this, the other big area is about technology, the infrastructure itself, which is a fair bit of complexity that we have. So there too, automation plays a big role in terms of how we help our own internal teams create more self-services. So there's a lot of automation, like a simple thing like a user journey of enablement of a user IDs to a password resets to disablement. So a lot of these small journeys, and anyone seeking let's say an incident, they want to look at a query, you can just you can do a lot more automation around it, coupled with a lot of the knowledge databases. So I think if you look at it broadly, there are four areas. Starting the front end from a customer journey right up to the back end, which is more internal facing. We're doing some very innovative stuff, and we're starting to see value behind it. We measure ourselves against each of these, and what we are effort that we're putting in. And I think this is what is going to help the bank, because it's all about how do you how do you create the environment for a bank to scale. And the scale is not going to be 2x or 3x, but scale is going to be a 7 to 10x. And all that is possible only when you create the automation and the efficiencies to it. That's the way I would put it.
A detailed one, I think, Mahesh, and a very important perspective here that you shared. Let me come with some specific questions. I want you to also tell us now at your bank, how are you managing the mix between manual intervention and automation? Because obviously, we are still at a stage where we cannot go for an automation completely, like the bankers are talking about the digital model. So could you please highlight how are you managing the manual and the intervention and the automation?
Yeah, absolutely, Amol. So if you look at it, like I said, this whole journey, we are on a journey. It is not like we are there and we are on the, we have delivered everything and working. Our goal is to go to zero ops, but we are evolving in that journey. Having said that, the whole approach that we're taking in terms of saying where there is the necessary checks and balances required from a payment authorization or a two-factor or a second level of authorization, those are definitively manual. Where you have certain high-risk profile transactions happening, where you need to get in for a manual intervention to double-check the transaction flow, or there is an elevated risk on a particular transaction, you will have to have manual interventions. Like for example, there are some journeys even in a customer flow where there are some customer queries which require multiple touch points to be addressed. So these are possibly manual interventions, which in the back end could pull that information, but the servicing could probably is still manual. So to me, another big area that we're working alongside is a whole reconciliation, right? A bank is all about payments. A bank is all about what money comes in, about what flows out. It's about multiplicity of that in the emerging digital space. So a reconciliation process is hugely focused around how we automate over 99.9% of it. But it is that 1%, which is very critical, which are exceptions. So the manual part is where we really look to see the interventions is required to be where you find a higher risk or there is an exception. So these are areas where we definitely are working. We continue to use the manual intervention and the path of automation journey. But we are still there. Like I continue to say, there's still a journey. We're still probably taking those baby steps and possibly measuring those incremental values as value proposition as we go ahead.
Right. Noted your points, Mahesh. I have been always learned from the market that the Yes Bank has a large number of fintech partnerships. I would like you to tell us, how has been the partnerships or collaborations with the fintechs helping you to excel in automation?
So I think it is a brilliant need for, and from a Yes Bank's perspective, where we've been fairly open to understand how fintechs create accelerated journeys and create accelerated deployments, create accelerated service enhancements. And we've in that process, more importantly, learned specifically in our integration process, where a lot of the automations that most of the fintechs have brought to the table, especially when they use some of the latest tools from an open source perspective, latest tools from an automation journey, from a cloud capability, how they interact and the integration. I think there's been some very, very, very good learnings that we've had. And it's also, we have been able to imbibe a few of them in terms of creating those self attestation, self certifications as we go into onboarding a lot of the fintech partnerships. So the journey is still there. We probably achieved a good 50-60% of what our targets are. But I think that's what has helped. So if you have a fintech who wants to engage with us, you know what, we can enable them on a sandbox. We're now in the position of helping them. We're still in the journey, but we are trying to get them self-certified such that it's pretty much everything is automated for them to plug into us. The individual goal is to say that you sign up on a form, click on, and you select your menu in terms of what you want as a service from Yes, and then you essentially then say, you know what, here is my what I want to download. I get to prepare the integration capabilities, test it out. The certification is passed, and then it's automatically upon authorization, you start enabling the transaction flow. I think that's where we want to be, but probably at about 40-50% there. So one of the big things, as you rightly said, Amol, given the fact that we've extremely focused on our growth with partnerships, we have a huge focus around that area, and we've been engaging with the partnership program in a more open mind. So we have to learn. We always the one thing that we have to say is that how do you balance your learning? How do you balance your new technology with the need to be secure and compliant? So that's the underpinning story. At the end of the day, you can create all integrations you want, our speed, but you have to be secure, you have to be compliant. Because that's what bank at the end of the day is measured upon, not just what its profitability, but also being secure and compliant to all the norms that we have across.
Okay, very well said. I have an important question, Mahesh. The theme of our event is hyper-personalization because we think that the superior customer service is where, or the superior customer experience is where all the BFSI companies are heading. Maybe it's bank or insurance company. That's what they want to do. Considering hyper-personalization, where the banks are actually, tailoring products for the customers and serving the way they want to, how automation is actually benefiting customers according to you? Because we are living in an era where nobody wants to go to the banks just to make a payment now.
So I think the hyper personalization is as yet, I would call it, is in a nascent stage in this ecosystem. I think we've not yet embarked upon creating that full end-to-end experience story. And this is where I believe a lot of the learnings come from our friends in the fintech world, because they focus a lot in terms of how you were able to create front-end B2C experiences for the customers. Now, when you look at hyper-personalization as an classic case in point would be when a customer is on a particular, say he or she is probably doing a purchase at a particular merchant, and it's not necessarily online, it could be even offline. And during the purchase, they say, you know what, I need some money and I don't have it, or probably I would like to take something different. Now, the ability for three or four systems to come together, the customer could initiate a request, and we are able to triage the customer's location, the customer's profile, and the customer's ask together, along with the backend risk scoring. If you're able to triage all of these together and present to the customer at that instant, here is, go ahead, we're giving you, take this money into your account, you have it, go ahead with your purchase. We can then continue our conversation, we can continue the journey. I think that's where one of the key use cases that we see. The other use case is the customer has a dispute. The other big one, which I think we're starting to do better there, is on the dispute journey. Customer does a transaction, The transaction is disputed because not sure whether it's completed or not. Now, your customer should be able to essentially punch in as to, hey, you know what, this transaction on my mobile, which I've just done, doesn't seem to be right. Check it, and then we probably double click on the transaction and raise a dispute. That whole dispute process of identifying if the transaction is indeed an invalid transaction or it is an incorrect transaction or it has probably been delayed transaction leading to a reversal, if you are able to service the customer back using automation and connecting a few more backend systems and giving the customer back the experience, you know what, uh, yeah, this transaction was not right. You've raised the dispute, we've checked this, here it is, we're giving the money back. Or in app, we are able to give the customer the status of the whole progress of that dispute is going to be another self experience, because at the end of the day, what does a customer want? You know what? Oh, there is an issue. Either the bank is proactively reached out, or upon raising a request, the bank is starting to acknowledge it and go through the process. So those experiences that you provide to the customer, one in the form of new business or in terms of a service request, are going to be very defining moments. I think a lot of the banks are in the journey. They're not yet, including us, we are in that journey. I don't think we've reached that great hyper personalization stage, but I think a lot of use cases being discussed. We will start having those incremental wins over the next 6 to 8 or 12 months, and you will see then lots of innovation coming in that space, because that's going to define the stickiness of the customer to the bank or to the extension that you play with the fintech partnerships. So that's going to be that's going to be very, very key.
Okay. Very, very valid points, Mahesh. What I want to, come back to again on automation. Obviously, a lot of things have already been automated, like you spoke about even reconciliation. And what's actually interesting is if payment fails automatically comes back to your account. That's really interesting. And there are many such things, on the operational front, which we can see has been automated, and many banks are actually heading in that direction. My question to you is, how do you actually measure the success of automation as well as the efficiency of the automation?
So again, as like I said, there are four distinct areas where we really look at the automation, and which all maps to any journey that a customer flows through, right? Touch point. So if you look at the front end, if you are going to if you're going to provide better experiences, it's about a net promoter score. There is NPS scores that we have. Now, that's a very key aspect. If you're not able to provide the customer that experience, uh, these scores start to vary, and that scores have a direct correlation to how the whole technology and the enablements are essentially being measured. So that's very critical. So that's a big way we're looking at it. At the same time, we're also saying that if you have automation in terms of onboarding, and like I talked about the use case about giving an instant gratification by virtue of a loan basis, a triaging that you do, it's about how quickly have you been able to upsell basis that dynamic ask. So how many number of accounts have you been able to lock in as a part of this journey? So that's more on the front end. So there are different metrics that we end up using. If you look at the middle office and the back office space, it's all about how the straight through processing improves your efficiency. The classic case is number of people saved, because those many number of man hours is what you save, and that's all a cost. Those number of man hours essentially can move to a better, I would say, better job or better process that can be here. So obviously, one simple metrics is the job, the cost that you save in that, and more importantly, the efficiencies that you bring. So which means if we today had a turnaround time, a TAT as we call it, a TAT of say 1 day to complete a particular account opening, and if that has come down to instantaneous or 10 minutes, you see the kind of experience you provide as well as the efficiency you create. So we have a combination of the efficiencies that are coming in as well as, and it's all bottom line is cost. If you're saving cost, That's great. So that's one on the middle office side, on the back office side. Then as you progress, like I talked about the risk part of the story, the risk part of the story is very important because if you're able to inline have your enterprise fraud engines coupled with the automation into your transaction life cycle, built along with the AI layer, what's going to happen if you're going to intervene and save certain frauds, possible frauds, if you're able to not, it should not be post facto, but it is inline, and hence you're sort of detecting it online and preventing it. Then it's all about what you've been able to prevent the frauds. So the what does that do? So the amount of money saved and flowing out, and hence you're getting a better experience, you're better risk managed, so your risk scores are better. Now the bank as an entity itself could be better off in terms of its ability to create more trust. The tangible part of it is the number of frauds that you have mitigated and the money saved accordingly. The intangible part is the increase in trust with the client, right? That's very important. Then when you go into the last space, which I talked about, was the whole technology and the infrastructure. So it's a time to spin up. It's a time to automate yourself, like internal ESAT scores,
Right.
employee satisfaction scores, serviceability, right? If at the end of the day, if from a technology perspective, if an end user has a password issue and if they are able to reset it immediately without intervention, what does it do? And with the right controls in place, obviously. And if you have that, then employee satisfaction score is up there. Your ESAT score, you're able to self-service, or they have a problem in one of the menus of core banking or something that they're passing a transaction. You have a self-help which is integrated to your knowledge database, and you're able to quickly help the customer, help the internal employee service the customer. Yeah, great, because that employee is now being able to service the customer better. He gets better off in saying, I'm not waiting for someone to call me, but I'm able to service this myself. So these are some small bits on the last, which is service and the employee satisfaction. So I said it's a broad brush, and you have multiple such key metrics that we really measure ourselves to, and it's a part of our entire journey. Now, as we pick up, so the way we picked up is that anything that we go into automation, anything that we want to create either an RPA around it or a straight through processing, there has to be an underlying measurement to it. If you don't have a measurement and which is tangible enough, then you really are not achieving it. So we really work towards those aspects, and those are essentially governed under a larger program framework. And any of those outputs, as we go into the process, essentially comes in as a post-implementation quarterly review to make sure we're really seeing the value, or are there tweaks required to enhance it. That's how we really work through.
Meaningful summary, Mahesh. And I have an important question since you mentioned about the cost saving and all those aspects. I mean, every automation, every innovation should at least somewhere translate it to business means as well. So how does automation translate into your business ultimately? Does it really save your cost? Does it like increase your efficiency and maybe you reach out to more customers and something like that? So on the business part, Mahesh.
So there are two parts to it. So when you look at automation, like I've said, if I am able to create efficiencies in my back office processes, what happens? The front end is able to generate more business, because at the end of the day, say, I can, if instead of doing 20,000 accounts a day, if I'm able to ramp it up to 30,000 accounts a day, you're directly doing a 30% improvement in your entire process. Right. And that's significant because you're driving growth. You're able to drive growth, and the growth essentially what it means, not just accounts but also balances. And these could be, if it's a savings account balance or a current account balance, it could be me increased opportunity for me to take a liability book which is better, and hence get us a much more better balance, right? From a business perspective, there are multiple advantages it brings to the table, right? So now that's a clear and efficiency driving more business. On one hand, you save cost, but you're also able to grow the business. I think that's a very key area. On the other hand, if you look at, like I talked about, infrastructure automation, it is about how you become more preventative, how you move towards a self-healing, such that you don't have, it's always on. So automation, specifically in terms of my availability, right? It's about saying if my systems are going to be available 24 by 7, 99.999% uptime, you see what it makes at the end of the day. You're able to give more availability to the customer, so it's always on, and that naturally gives you a much more better standing in the market to be able to go and tell the customer, you know what, my systems are at the highest level of availability, and it allows you to be measuring. So that's a, well, that the measure is a high availability, but the front end is all about high serviceability and increased amount of serviceability. So those are some of the measurements that we end up working towards. Again, it's on a journey, and it's always going to be that how do we incrementally start measuring a success to go from 99.5% to a 99.9% and then 99.99% and meet. And all of this underpinned by what we call it as the compliance part of the story and how we do the risk assurance. That's very critical.
Right. Noted your points, Mahesh, and that was really meaningful. I think I should stop here since the watch is already ticking. But I think it has been really meaningful because I think we didn't realize how the time has passed. But quickly, in 30 seconds, if you allow me to ask just before I wrap up, what kind of changes do you see in automation maybe in next 2 to 3 years in the whole banking space?
It's an interesting question, Amol, but the way I would probably play this is automation will end up becoming an imperative rather than a good to have.
Okay.
Which would mean that every bank would say that if I were to get into any new product launch, these product or service enhancements, it will need, one of the checkpoints will be how do I do straight through processing or how I do zero ops. I think that's where it evolves. So anything and everything that from a tech enablement perspective comes in, these are imperatives now rather than good to haves. I think that's where we will move. And a lot of learning is going to come from the way some of the good fintech companies have enabled themselves and have dedicated themselves in terms of building that scale at very, very low human footprint. I think that's going to be a very interesting use cases, which may not be necessarily banking, it could be outside of banking, but being able to adopt and adapt and see how to bring those into your processes is going to be very critical. So these are absolute imperatives you're going to see in the next 2 to 3 years. You can't say that I will create automation as one of the subsets of your process, but it will be in line with your process.
Okay. Great, Mahesh. Thank you so much for your participation and sharing your views at ETBFSI Converge. Thank you so much, Mahesh.
Thank you, Mr. Ramamoorthy and Amol, for a very interesting chat session. Your detailed explanation gave really interesting learnings. Hope you all are sharing the knowledge on social media using the hashtag ETBFSI Converge. Let's take a short break. Stay tuned.